traditional stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Well, hello there, Housers, and welcome to another episode of On the Way Home. I am your host, Michael Braithwaite. I hail from a great organization called Blue Door. Blue Door is an organization that's been around for 41 years, operating just north of Toronto in York, Peel, and Durham, offering our most vulnerable support around housing of all sorts, emergency, transitional, longer term, supportive. We have a program called INNclusion, INNclusion. That's fairly new for 2SLGBTQ plus youth, supportive and affordable housing there. We have a really cool construction social enterprise that not only gets people into the trades where they can build the affordable housing we need across the country, but lifts them out of poverty because it pays a living wage right out of the gate and is very meaningful. It's homelessness prevention at its best. So pretty cool. Hats off to the over 100 people at Blue Door doing grassroots amazing work across many different communities. You can check us out at bluedoor.ca. We run this podcast in partnership with incredible folks led by the fearless Tim Richter at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Check out what they do at caeh.ca. They have a huge conference coming up in the fall in Halifax. The program's out. They've got incredible speakers from all over the world covering various different topics. It's the largest conference in the sector. It's so cool. You want to check that out. You want to sign up now. Hopefully you can still get the early bird discount, but it's worth it regardless. Check that out and much, much more. They do all sorts of advocacy work. Recently, when the city of Barrie was looking at passing a bylaw to ban people from giving, and they were going to fine people for giving out water or food or money to people experiencing homelessness. CAEH did an incredible job of advocacy across the country, and fortunately, because of that work and that groundswell, the council backed off from that. So they do that work. If you want to become a Built for Zero community, and let me tell you, you do, they can help you with that. And they've done that in so many different places that have reduced chronic homelessness, reduced veterans homelessness, reduced homelessness as a whole. So check it out, caeh.ca. Blue Door and CAH do this podcast together, and it is on the way home. We have incredible guests every week. We have lived experts, people that share their lived history with us. We have researchers. We have people that are running incredible programs, rising to the challenges that face us. And there's a lot right now across the country, and they share that. And so hopefully we can learn each episode, grow, create awareness, educate, and face these challenges together in the battle to prevent and end homelessness. This week, we have two incredible guys that join us, Brian and Carl, and they've been together 49 years. We know that people experiencing homelessness, 2SLGBTQ plus individuals experiencing homelessness, are way overrepresented when we do point-in-time counts. Anywhere from, say, 17 to 40% of people that experience homelessness will identify as being from the queer community. And we have worked hard, and we continue to work hard and have a lot more work to do to make sure we're running programs that are supportive of people from the community. But that wasn't always the case. And I think as we reflect, as we record this podcast, Pride Parade in Toronto saw hundreds of thousands of people. It was incredible. York Pride Parade had a great turnout and groundswell of support. The Yukon just had their first parade. There's parades across Canada. There's a ton of support, and it's so heartwarming and awesome to see. But it wasn't always this way. And why it's so important to have individuals like Brian and Carl tell their story of coming out, of coming together, of hiding their relationship. Of they were both teachers, they couldn't tell anyone. Carl said he couldn't be his full self the whole time he was teaching. He could never talk about his weekends or his life and share that with students for fear of losing his job or getting hurt, reprisal. Brian tells me the story in the podcast of, thinking a principal was great, and then him talking about how anyone when the AIDS crisis was happening, and saying that hopefully we'll wipe out gay men, and him because of that leaving the school, going to teach somewhere else. But they talk about the hope too, and all the things that began to change, and how the unions began to give them equal rights and things happening, and to Pierre Trudeau saying the state has no business in the bedrooms of Canadians, and how that was a shocker back then for any country's leader to say that, and ours did. They remain incredibly hopeful. They talk about it being illegal. When they were young and they first came out, they both grew up in small towns that were not exactly open to coming out, or for anyone to be who they are. And so the story is incredible, but they are very hopeful. They talk about things changing, how they met, and they've endured. And now they're celebrating in 2024. They'll be together 50 years. And they got married as soon as they were able to. And they talk about how their families, Brian's family, mother from England, dad was a vet. Carl talks about his mom coming to terms with that, because it was even tougher being from those small towns, the challenges they had to overcome. And they share that and much, much more. I think it's so important for us to learn and understand how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. An incredible podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's go to On the Way Home. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I've known the two of you for about just over 20 years. And I was so excited when he said you'd come on the show and talk about your journey. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah. We always ask all our guests when they come on, because it means a little different to everyone, and you can decide who wants to answer first. And that is just, when you think of home, what does that mean to you?
Well, for the almost 50 years, home has been this guy. The structure matters to us. We started out in a little tiny apartment on Sherburne at Shooter, and it was Carl's apartment. But we always, he'd already created a lovely home for himself when I met him. And then, we had a little duplex that we rented at Pape and Eastern, and we turned that into a lovely little jewel of a place with our landlord's permission, and he was very grateful actually to have a gay coupling in the house in 1975. But really it's about people, and it's about feeling safe and feeling welcome and secure, and we try to do that when we have people in our home as well. So that's what it's to me.
We moved to the country in Parksville
and Carlisle.
In Carlisle, and we bought a home with the kind graces of some neighbors who loaned us the money, and we accepted it, and we became responsible, and it became our home for 30 years. Before we came to British Columbia.
Yeah, you guys both, like, just following your journey through social media and seeing, you literally moved across the country.
Really?
When you retired, you moved across there, and just the pride and joy. And I see, when I think you guys actually make me think of home a lot, because you celebrate that, whether it's your garden, Carl's baking, Brian's art, Carl's piano play, like just all the different things you do. You guys really know how to live life, let me tell you.
Well, thank you.
We had some great teachers too, Mike.
Yes.
Lots of wonderful people to model that for us. Carl's mother was a wonderful homemaker, as were my parents. They were in the same house for 50 years. In fact, that's gave us the courage in our 50s, and Carl was 60, to make the move across the country, because we realized that as long as we were together, we could go and build a home anywhere. And even in our retirement, which is when I retired in 2004, we were coming back from my parents, and Carl asked, "Are we going to be in our house for?" Because we'd already been there 20 years, maybe at the time. "Are we going to be there forever, like your parents have been?" And I said, "Not necessarily. How do you feel about it?" And he said, "Yeah, let's think about that." So we just literally kind of looked around the country and found a growing zone that worked for us, which was the best for gardening all year round, and being outside and being active, and staying fit in our retirement. So we made that move. Some people thought we were crazy. We didn't know anybody here. Maybe we were, but we were feeling kind of led to keep trying new stuff. We like being home, but we're also kind of adventurous at the same time.
Very cool. And as you've said, home's not really about the four walls and the roof. It's about the people, right?
Exactly.
And it's about the two of you and the community you create. Let's talk about community. So across the country right now and over the summer, it's wonderful to see. As we record this, Toronto Pride was Saturday, York Pride was Saturday before, Yukon just had its first Pride parade ever. They're happening. You see this groundswell, and it's beautiful to see. You feel the love and the celebrations and those things happening. And I think for people to see that, they're saying, "Wow!" And for younger people, and I was telling you when we were chatting before, I was saying my daughter Irene is gay, and she told us that once, and it wasn't a big coming out story, right? So I think for her, when she told us, and it was pretty straightforward, it's like, "Hey, I'm going on a date," and we said, "Cool," and she said it's with a girl, and we said, "Be home by 11 because it doesn't really matter as long as you're happy and safe." But I mean, for her, and I think she was actually disappointed that it wasn't more like traumatic, but I mean, for her, I think that safety. She might take a lot of that for granted, and she sees the parade, the young people see this, and they see this great love and support. And we'll talk about, there still needs to be a lot more of that. But you guys have been together 49 years, right?
That's right.
49 years. Coming up on
1974. That's right. 1974 we met. So next year's our 50th year.
Wow, like almost 50 years. And I want to talk about that journey, because as people celebrate this, it has not, 49 years you've endured and the things you've seen. We want to talk about that, because I think when people appreciate too the past, now people have endured and come through, there's a greater understanding as well. So as much as you're comfortable, maybe you could share your stories of growing up, where you grew up, and when you came out and understood, and you were comfortable, right? Because that comes at different times. But if you're comfortable sharing your stories,
Sure.
that'd be great.
Can I start?
Yes, you start.
Okay. I was born in Tillsonburg, Ontario, and I was born in 1945. So my coming out story did not happen in Tillsonburg. It happened when I went to Western in London, and my mother had been influential in forming me because she had always encouraged me to be an independent thinker, and so it wasn't quite what she'd expected, but she eventually fell in love with Brian, and so we have been well directed, and I'm so grateful for not just for my mother's kindness, but for the kindness of every teacher, every academic who has patted me on the back and welcomed me into my life journey with them.
Okay, well, I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie. I'm a Northern Ontario boy, although some people in Ontario don't think that's really Northern Ontario, but it is. And I was right near Lake Superior. It was a hockey town and a steel town. My dad worked at the steel plant, and my brother did too. And I worked there in the summers during university for a couple of years to make money to go back to school. But it was a hockey and steel town, and it was tough for me in many ways, because I wanted to figure skate. I didn't want to play hockey, although I could skate really well. I was put on skates when I was 2 years old in the backyard rink. Everybody had one, and I was a good little skater. Yeah, I mean, by my mid-teens, I was really feeling like, I don't know how I ended up here, but this doesn't feel right. And I made a plan that I was going to go to Toronto, because I somehow heard, and there was very little information. There was no internet then. We're talking 1965. You can imagine. It was still all illegal. We were criminals in the eyes of the law, being gay. And but somehow I wanted to go to Toronto. I just felt like maybe that was a world where I could explore who I was more freely, and find a place for myself. So, I'm grateful to grow up in the north. I loved Lake Superior. It's where the Group of Seven painted a few decades before I was born. And then spent lots of summers on the beach collecting agate at Lake Superior Provincial Park and Pancake Bay and Batchewana Bay. So I've got good memories of my childhood, but I definitely needed to go to a big center to ultimately to come out. It took me a long time after I got there, but I did eventually come out. Did you want us to talk about coming out? I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is always, we say it's just your total comfort.
Yeah, sure. Oh, no, I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
I took until I was 22 years old to come out, and it was a very important, long process for me. I'd studied history at York University. It was a liberal university. There was even a gay and lesbian dance in McLuhan College, where I was a resident. But I had a girlfriend at the time, and I remember kind of peering over the balcony into the dark to see these people that were same-sex couples dancing. And I knew deep inside that something was going on. So I fortunately was living in my third year and beyond with a family in Etobicoke. And the mother of that family was a wonderful woman in her 50s. Her name was Brady. And I listened to her experiences in the United States with Black people and her openness. And I eventually had the courage, once I had told my girlfriend that I didn't think we should continue, that I thought it was gay. It was really hard to say, and she hardly blinked. And she got on the line with telephone, that is, with George Hislop and Peter Maloney, who were pioneers in LGBT history in Toronto. There was an office for the Community Homophile Association of Toronto, CHAT. It was a precursor to 519, and I had an appointment. She set it up. She was a housewife in Etobicoke on the Kingsway, and she made this phone call and found out that there was going to be somebody that I could talk to, and set me up to go to my first dance, which was at the Chinese Cultural Center in behind Nathan's Phillips Square. There was this big empty hall, and I remember being terrified of walking up these steps to the second floor where there was a dance. It was just like a big hall, really, and terrible sound system. And I was terrified and glued against the wall, kind of watching and waiting to meet somebody. So anyway, that was my coming out story. It was I was very fortunate. I had people that were there for me, even through helping me through my greatest fear about it. So I didn't look back after that.
I'd just like to add that in the mid-'60s, when I came out with a friend at Western, it was such a magical experience for me that I thought, if this is what it means to be breaking the law in Canada, then I'm afraid that I'm going to have to go that route, because this is what I need to do. This is what I want to be. And I was ready to go to jail for it if I had to. Fortunately, that never came about, but I was ready. So,
Wow.
He was brave.
it's,
Well, I mean, if you're saying, listen, I need to be who I and if that means going to jail, then so be it, right? And good for you for having that strength. Now, so you both came out at university and you have supports, which is wonderful, which means a lot, and not everyone has those, unfortunately. And we see that. I mean, part of so youth experiencing homelessness or from the 2SLGBTQ plus community are way overrepresented. And part of that is too, it's like kids come out to their parents and they're not, they may have no street knowledge at all, right? They've grown up, they're doing well in school, they have friends, they come out to their parents, they finally sum up the courage. And then parents are like, well, you can't live here then, unless you're not gay. And of course, as Carl's saying, well, it's who I am. And so they end up on the street without any knowledge of what do I do now, and so they're in dire straits. So supports are huge. But you talk about, I mean, you had friends, and there was like the language used, the homophile club, and so when you come up to your friends, you're at university. How do you share this? And were you nervous about talking to your family about it, or did they kind of figure it out, or not?
Okay, go ahead.
I'll start this time. Yeah, that wasn't easy for me, and my parents really struggled with it. They were in Northern Ontario. They didn't know, it was a very closeted, world in Northern Ontario at that time. There was certainly no pride parade or it was something that a lot of shame and guilt and all of that was attached to. So it was tough for my parents, and it didn't go well, quite frankly, coming out. My brother and sister-in-law supported us initially. Eventually, my parents did, but it was tough. And I know my parents were doing the best they could. I think it was lonely for them. I think about it now, and I think about how afraid they were, probably for me, and eventually for both of us, because I had decided I was coming out to them by the time I was 25. I'd been with Carl for a year, and I decided I couldn't go back home unless they knew that this important person was in my life. And as hard as that was, and I anticipated that it was going to be a tough time, I knew I had to do it, and I'm glad now, all those years later, that I did. And we all ended up in a far better place before my parents passed, just before COVID. So we, it all worked out, but it was a tough time for me.
My coming out, the only person that mattered in my mind was my mother, because I didn't want to lose her affection and her kindness towards me. And it took me about almost 10 years to come out to her. And when I did, she had already knew, of course, as you might expect. And she said to me, "Carl, it's okay." And I broke down. We cried in each other's arms, and then we moved on with our lives, because from then on it was open channel, and I was able to share everything that was going on in my life with her.
She was certainly our supporter for every day after I met her until she died, unfortunately, in '96. But I did know her for 20 some years, and she was an absolute ally for us, and vice versa, we hope.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's fun. Sometimes I'll hear from people, well, I'm too old to change, or I'm too, which is absolutely not true. I'll tell you a good story of hope. We run a construction program that gets people into the trades, because part of the problem why we don't have housing across Canada is there's no one to build it. So we run this program that has multiple wins because they're going to build the housing that we need. And when they get into construction, they actually make a living wage, youth and newcomers, and they can actually pull themselves out of poverty, right? And they have purpose, right? It's great. It's great to be in trades. But we have a lot of 2SLGBTQ plus youth that go into the trades. And the trades have not been known to be open to people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, and the 2SLGBTQ plus community, women. But they're really trying. They're making an effort, and it was a beautiful thing to see. We had this older kind of shop guy at Luna 506, Ron, and he was great, and the kids loved him. And he's like, "All right, tell me again. Is it they, them, and how do I, but trying and making an effort." And Ron been doing this for like 40 some odd years, and so it can happen. And if you're open and to change it. So it was really cool to see the kids having fun with Ron and helping him and acknowledging that he's not going to get it perfect, right? But at least he's making an effort, and to see,
yeah. When you talk about this friend of yours, this tradesman, I'm reminded of my mother, like much later in her life. And my mother came through World War II in England. So she was a bomb girl, actually, for age 14 in England, Northern England. 1939, and married my dad, who was a Canadian vet. But in her late 80s, my mother had never used a computer or used a typewriter or anything. She was, one of the women of that generation weren't really allowed to work because a man was seen as the one that had to provide for his wife and children. And so women, in my mother's case, she didn't drive, she didn't have employment or anything like that. And she was about 89 at the time, and I remember her saying, "I've given myself a Christmas present early this year." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, I'm getting an iPad." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yes. Well," she said, "I'm tired of asking your brother to bring his laptop over so I can see what you guys are doing and your home and your Carl's desserts and all of that stuff." So I said, "But Mom, you've never used a computer before." And she said, "That's okay. I've got a young man from Staples is going to come and give me a tutorial." And sure enough, like I'm talking the next day, my mother somehow managed to get onto Facebook. She created a profile. He must have helped her. And her first post was, "Iris is here." And I'm like, oh my God. She lived for another 5 years. And that made such a difference in our communication together.
Really?
That the last 5 years of her life. Yeah, and even though we're 3,000 kilometers apart, she was taking a very active role in our life, and with our friends. Of course, everybody wanted to be friends with Iris. So, yeah, you're right. Change is always possible, always.
Well, I think it's so interesting too. You both come from small towns that notoriously, especially back then, were not, as Brian, you very kindly said, we're not really open to. So I would say it was terrifying. Even I had a friend in the late 90s in St. Catharines, and he came out, and we all knew he was gay, but he came out of it. He said, "So why didn't you come out before?" He said St. Catharines wasn't really a welcoming place. He said, "I feared," but he came out when he came to Toronto. He said, because the exception, like I'd be accepted and I wouldn't fear for my life and the people around, because it was also, St. Catharines was GM town, right? So very much so, again, not to stereotype, but not really open. A lot has changed. But you guys both coming from small towns makes this journey. You meet in Toronto. I love the story. If you don't mind sharing, we got into a bit now for listeners. We tried that. We were chatting with Carl and Brian before on the podcast, and unfortunately we had some tech difficulties. So we get a second shot at this, and I'm so grateful. It's such a wonderful story. But if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how the two of you met 49 plus years ago.
Yes, you can.
Okay, so
and then I'll correct him.
Yes, you listen carefully. He's my editor. Okay, so it was early September. I can't remember exactly the day, but it was definitely the beginning of September, late August. And I was living at 242 Sackville in Cabbagetown. I was going back to school. I had my degree, but now I was going to art college. I got accepted into OCA at the time, now OCAD, and for fine arts. And so I couldn't afford to keep an apartment. That was my first year after coming out. I had an apartment up at Broadway and Eglinton area. And anyway, I moved in with a slightly older gay couple that were great friends of mine. And they were also very sociable. And it was a Saturday morning. I had probably been at a disco somewhere, the Manatee at the time. that nobody will know where that is. But anyway, it's on St. Joseph Street, and it was a dance club and had drag shows. Anyway, I had been there on Friday night, and Saturday morning, I'm sitting around in their kitchen having my cereal, and the door opens at the front, and there's two lovely young men come in. Carl was one of them. Carl was carrying a couple of bags of groceries, and they were coming for breakfast. And I was, of course, the fifth wheel, feeling sorry for myself. So I quickly excused myself in my house coat, kind of embarrassed actually, because it just, Anyway, went upstairs, called my friend Brady out in Etobicoke and said, they're having company again. Can I come over and have lunch with you? And so that's what happened. That was my first encounter with him.
Okay,
I have to ask though, knowing the bathrooms back in the day, was that one of the shorty robes?
It wasn't, but he did take notice of my legs. It was a blue terry cloth. They call it my Marilyn Monroe robe. Only it wasn't white, it was blue.
Yeah, what Brian didn't know was that the guy I was with was a casual acquaintance, really. We had spent a little time together, but we weren't close friends. But Tony had said to me, why don't we go and make breakfast at these two guys' place over in Cabbagetown? And I thought, well, it's a little strange, but if you think so, then yeah, we'll do it. And when we came in with our groceries, we hadn't met John or Bob at that time, but we quickly got to get on with breakfast. And Brian came downstairs, and of course I noticed his legs. I was preparing breakfast for 5, and we had 5, but there was only 4. Brian never showed up, so
I know.
You missed your first date.
You missed the first
I did.
day. Exactly.
However, he came, as I said, these guys were partiers. So like 2 weeks later, now I'm in my first week of school, I think, and up to here with homework and assignments. And Saturday they're having a party. And who should show up at the party along with, I don't know, 50 or 60 other people? That was crazy times, the 70s, I'll tell you. Was this guy, but he was alone. But the other guy was at the party, but clearly they weren't together. So somehow Carl and I ended up in the same room together, and that was great.
I said to him, what do you think of the music? And he says, not much. It was common stuff that was going on at the time. And I said, well, I've got some lovely tapes out in my car.
Oh yeah, she said, do you like classical? Oh, and I said, well, I don't know a lot about it, but I mean, it was him asking me, so I said, yes, I am.
Of course I do.
I invited him out to the car, and our little fingers connected.
You're telling that?
With the steering wheel, and they just all took off from there. I invited him. I eventually invited him over for supper in my apartment, which was
eventually it took you 2 weeks to call, and I thought you were never going to call me, but anyway, never mind.
Anyway, I did call him, and he said he'd love. I said, how would you like to come over tonight? And I said, I could. I was also working at the time, so I had marked quite a number of papers, and I didn't have a lot of time, but I said I would, and we got a little bit more acquainted, and then I invited him over for a supper at my place, and he came, and he never went home.
No, every time, okay. Every morning he would say, would you like to come back for dinner tonight? I'm like, okay. So by Christmas time, I think I officially left Sackville, packed whatever few things I had, and moved in with Carl. So, that's not true about lesbians and the U-Hauls. It's also gay men in the 70s were like that too. And basically, anyway, it felt right. I just knew he was very special, and it was
well, you could let me tell you guys, 49 years later, obviously, you're finishing each other's sentences. I can see that it was meant to be. But let's say this has not been I mean, you got together and without its challenges, right? Not for your relationship, but I mean, you now have a serious relationship. You have to maneuver. And I remember, stories of Carl and Brian, both of you sharing that you could not exactly tell the world about your relationship, say at work. Can you share a little bit about some of those challenges you face?
Sure. Well, I you could lose your job if they knew if people found out you were gay, and
especially teaching,
because you had young people under your belt, and I respected that, but at the same time, I never came out to any of my students, which was the right thing to do at the time, because that's not what I was hired to do. So I did miss, at the end of my career, I could have easily said, the one thing I miss most about teaching was that I was never able to be a complete human being in front of my students. I was never able to have a relationship. I could never talk about the nice weekend I just had, or anything like that. It was
speaking of pronouns, we had to we didn't, but there were people that we knew that would change the pronouns from he to she, on Monday morning when asked what they had done, and in order to protect their jobs. That's pretty horrible, so I think about the movies like Boys in the Band and things like that. That was pretty authentic, what I saw. That's one reason that our home was such an important place, was the one little place we could cocoon and just be ourselves. And we actually lived many miles from our jobs, almost our whole teaching careers. I worked in Brantford and in Guelph, so that was quite a commute from Carlisle. And Carl commuted from downtown Toronto out to Peel, where he that was his first teaching job, was at Cawthron Park, and then Applewood Heights, and then John Fraser. But in all those cases, we were living at a far distance from our thing, so we could go and shop and sort of have more normal life that way, rather than have to skulk around and not be together. I mean, we wanted our free time to be at least together and not have to worry about that.
So you were strategic with how you did that.
We had to be strategic, and it was expensive because we had to maintain 2 vehicles to do that always. We went through cars really quickly. In 1985, I was working on my first probationary contract in teaching. So I went into teaching later. Carl got me into teaching with a night school job at his high school at Maplewood. I was doing calligraphy, and but eventually I went and I sort of created a road show with my calligraphy classes, and was teaching in Halton and Hamilton and where else, Peel, and those 3 boards, until I decided I really liked teaching, and I was going to go back and get my degree at 32 from U of T for teaching. So I did that. So anyway, my first couple of years of full-time teaching were on a probationary contract. I don't know, probably it's the same. I don't know if that's the same today. But for the first 2 years, you were basically assessed almost as a student teacher, and any grounds for dismissal could be there. They never had to justify it. Being gay was one of them for sure. And they could just call you in and say, based on a rumor, we're not renewing your contract next year. Well, that meant that you had to start all over again, but it also meant that you had to, if you were going to apply to another board, you had this, nefarious reason for dismissal in the previous board. So, it was a tough. That was 1985, and I remember, sadly, it was a time of Rock Hudson being flown back to Canada to the U.S. from Paris. He had been diagnosed with AIDS, and in fact, I just watched a documentary on that the other night and didn't realize he had to hire his own 747 because he needed a stretcher. He was so sick, and no airline in North America would bring or Europe would bring him back. They refused anybody who had AIDS at that time to travel. So he had to spend $250,000, $250,000 US in 1985 to have himself brought back, where he died a few weeks later. But it was such a different world, you know. Things.
You had a principal.
Yes,
saying,
yes, that's what. Thank you for reminding me. That's where I was going with that. And during recess one day, we watched. It was a teacher's break. You know, we were in the staff room, and the principal at the time, who was a young guy actually, he was just a few years older than I was. He might have been 40. He said, you know, that's good that he was dying, and that this is something that all gay people needed to do, you know, just to clean up the world. And it's just like, I got to get out of here. I did. I left. I actually left and went to another board to teach, because I felt like, you know, I was in my 30s. I wasn't going to put up with that, and I knew that I didn't want to work for somebody like that. But it blindsided me. I didn't realize that that's how somebody felt, that this particular guy felt. I really got along with him in every other way. But so yeah, it was a tough time for us.
It was.
When do you feel like things started changing a little bit towards the end of your teaching careers? Were you feeling like, were you, I mean, now you see it's wonderful to see gay straight alliances, you see PFLAG and other things happening in schools. You know, so did you see that towards the end of your career, some steps being taken and people, a little, the acceptance growing?
Yes.
You know, in the early years, you could probably come out to some of your colleagues, and most of us did. I'm not saying it was always possible, but you found support amongst your teaching staff. And although you didn't have the same support from students for the same reasons, it was a good thing that teachers knew how to teach. Well, they knew how to treat each other. And eventually, when things began to change politically in Ottawa, then we became citizens.
Well, there were also movements within the teachers' unions. One of the things that happened was there were allies that we had, straight teachers that were advocating on our behalf as a gay couple. So the OSSTF in Ontario was instrumental in helping to change laws federally and provincially. And they were sort of the front runners of providing same-sex couples with the same rights, the same obligations to the couples that they had to heterosexual couples. So one of the things was the survivor pension benefits, which until, the 90s, at least the late 90s, Carl and I were subsidizing the pension plans of our colleagues who were straight. And the best that I could do for Carl was leave him a $40,000 kind of annuity, kind of insurance plan, but that was it. And our colleagues their pensions would be there for their partners or wives or husbands for the rest of their lives. And so we saw some great advocacy and some of them were our friends. I mean, Betty Ann Bushell in Hamilton, who worked in the appeal board, she was instrumental in advocating for us on that. So we've had lots of things happened in our lifetime in teaching and since that we never ever imagined. We just couldn't have imagined what happened in terms of good things, you know, the things that changed our life and made our retirement what it is, you know, that we live with certain degree of security and financial stability that we would not have had if those laws hadn't changed. So we saw lots of hopeful things happening, and we were kind of astounded, actually, certainly being able to get married and all that stuff as well.
We never imagined that we would be where we are now at any point in our teaching career, practically.
Yeah.
So it's been quite lovely, and
We don't take for granted.
no, we never take it for granted.
Because we know what it's like to not have it. And, I was a student of history. I know what happened in Germany in the 20s and 30s, right up until, 33. People in Germany was one of the most progressive countries in the world in terms of sex, accepting sexual variations and lifestyles and orientations and all of that. Quite closely resemble what's happening today. And that's why, I'll never take this for granted. We all have to continue to advocate, stand up, call out homophobia and transphobia whenever we see it, and explain to people why it is important to honor things like pronouns and so on. That's part of the whole thing.
So important what you're saying, both of you, around Germany being progressive, and then how quickly people forget things can slide back. And I think sometimes you hear right now where people are like, do we still need the Pride Parade? Do we need, and there's questions around that. But to your point, how quickly things can slide, what we saw happen in Germany, and what we do see. I mean, recently where I am, the York school board, Catholic school board, would not raise the flag at their head office.
Oh yeah, we're following all of that out here, and believe me, it's just as much part of the news out here as it is in Ontario. Yeah, I mean, I was just reading that the cost of security this year was double what it has been in the past for Pride, because of those very things. Because there are hate groups, there are people who don't want us to, for whom our lifestyles are frightening, and they want to, have us disappear. And,
I'd like to say that the politicians in Ottawa, starting from, well, I would say Pierre Trudeau certainly, but it may have been building before then. But when he made the statement about the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation, then things began to develop in a progressive way from that statement, because he was speaking the truth. And many people who were colleagues of his accepted that.
That was revolutionary at the time. Yeah, it was revolutionary at the time. I was 18 years old in Sault Ste. Marie, still in high school. And I remember that. I remember watching that in black and white on the CBC News. But, since then I've realized through reading that it was setting shockwaves out into the rest of the world, because really nobody in the Western world, certainly not a world leader, had ever said anything like that before. So, yeah.
And so when we became citizens alongside of everybody else in the nation, that was absolutely the essential thing for Canada to do, and no other nation has done it in quite that way. But ever since it happened in Canada, Brian and I have felt like whole citizens.
Well,
and
it's one extra level of fear and so on. It just provided a lot more security for us. But again, let's not take it for granted.
No, we can't.
Ever. I have to say, we're really, we love what you're doing, Mike. And, we're inspired by what you're doing. We watched you at the YMCA as a CEO of YMCA, executive director at Waterdown Y, when we first met around 20 years ago. And watched you go from strength to strength since then. And we're planning in our estate planning. We are including Blue Door because we think it's such an important thing. And we have a great pension from our teaching days in Ontario, and we really feel. While I had come out at 22, I saw very young people out, much younger than I, in the clubs in Toronto in 1972, 73, when I was just coming out. And, they were not they did not enjoy the safety and security that I had. I had a nice, warm, clean bed to go home to at night, living with a family that loved me and accepted me for who I was and still do. And that's why we were back in Toronto last month, was to see the daughter of Brady and her husband, who are celebrating big birthdays out in Old Mill. And but I realized that problem has been going on for forever. And there were street kids, gay street kids, queer street kids out on at Yonge and Bloor in 1972 when I was going to those clubs, and they didn't have homes to go to even then. So it's really important to support what you're doing, and in our case, put back a little bit of what we have received and still receive from Ontario.
Yeah.
We're so grateful for that support, and it means so much. And I tell you, guys, like sometimes it takes us a while to get it right as a country, even as leaders in the community, because what we do is we created youth homelessness programs that would support, but kids from the queer community would be like, I'm not going there. I get it. If you might understand, but I'm gonna get beat up by half the kids. I got to share a room, and then even then we think we're progressive, and we said, yeah, but we have this one. If you need a gender neutral washroom, just ask for the staff for the key. And they say, you know what, every time I do that, I'm coming out again. So even our best intentions are like, well, I never thought of it because you didn't ask, Mike, because you didn't ask anyone. But we keep improving. So the INNclusion house that we did was a result of, we had not one, but two research studies done where the kids were saying, we don't feel safe in traditional programs. There's different supports we need. We need staff that understand and can listen. And so despite our best intentions, that wasn't happening. And what Blue Door did, I said, I don't need a third study because kids are scared. Let's just do it, because we couldn't find the funding. And I'll tell you guys, this is 2 years ago. So we went out to find a house, rent a house for this inclusion program. And it took us almost a year because of homophobia and transphobia, because even though we were saying to landlords, we'll pay you a year in advance. It was just that fear still existed. And one of the best things that happened to us was the foundation stepped up and said, what's going to stop this program from continuing in the future? I said, well, we're at the mercy of a landlord. As soon as they kick us out, we could be waiting another year with kids who need a home now. So they gave us the money to buy that house, which was incredible. So now it's there forever. And it's great, right? And the kids have said, what a game changer, right? So we have to continue through this work. And we look at, I think we've come so far. It's amazing. We look at, I think it was just last year that Canada finally banned conversion therapy. I mean, that's 2022. And that, was it just giving blood too? It was just last year or just recently?
Yes. So that from 1981 on, we had been blood donors, hadn't we?
I had been a blood donor along with my family for years, and all of a sudden we were told, we'll take your blood, but we'll only use it for experimental purposes.
Yes.
So it didn't, you couldn't help a person with your blood.
Yeah, which is, anyway.
And that went on till last year, right? From 81 to.
That's right.
So yes, and it's so wonderful having you on, talking about, listen, still thriving, looking great. You're both, I have no idea how you stay so fit with the pictures I see on your social media of all the food.
Well, we have to share our desserts for sure. I mean, I make sure of it. We have a great neighbor who does all kinds of handyman stuff for us, which is terrific because neither of us can do much in that department. And Graham comes over with an empty plate. I just text and say, Carl's baking, and he arrives with his plate. And his wife says, keep doing what you're doing for those guys because we want some more dessert. So yeah, anyway, it's a good life.
Yeah.
We're very blessed. We have a very rich life, and we live in a
thank you so much for sharing your journey. I think it's so important for people to understand the challenges, the great things that have happened, like the challenges that have happened, the great things that have happened, where we still need to go. Yes. I think that, a lot of young people from the 2SLGBTQ plus community, can look up to the two of you to say 49 years, you're president of the earth through some really, really tough stuff. And one more year till 50. It's incredible. It's an incredible story. And I think I'm so glad that you guys agreed to share that, and for all you do for, you're such a blessing to your community as well. Just all the little pieces you bring and how involved you get. You truly make your community a home. So thank you for that.
Well, we admire very much, Mike, and all the best to everybody at Blue Door. And on the way home, thank you so much for that, and for just reaching out for us.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Now, if people want to check out some of this stuff, I don't know, you have great, so our listeners know, both artists in their own right, musicians, artists, bakers, multi-talented, and you share a lot of that on social media. If people wanted to check that out or support, where can they go?
So for me, you would look for Brian Middleton Art. So my name is like Kate, so it's easy to remember now because everybody knows her name. So Brian Middleton Art, and also brianmiddletonart.com is my website. So please check it out. And if you do, please say hello. I love to hearing from people, and I will get back to you.
I don't have a website.
But you have.
But
Instagram.
Do I?
Yes, you do. He has Instagram. Carl J. McLuhan. As in Marshall McLuhan, another famous name.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for sharing and joining with us.
Thanks, Mike. Say hi to Sylvia.
Who else?